Masechet Gittin, Daf Lamed. We're going to see a new Mishnah today that has nothing to do with Gittin, but is only connected because the previous Mishnah was about the presumption that if the last time you saw someone, they were alive, then you can presume that they are still alive. But that will relate to Teruma and Maaser. But first, we're going to complete the discussion here about adding a condition to a get. Yomin. A husband tells his wife, here is a get, and it will be effective from now if I do not arrive within 30 days. So he's going away on a trip. He doesn't want his wife to be in aguna, and if he should leave and who knows, get lost, we don't know what's going to happen to him. He doesn't want his wife to be stuck and never know where he is. So therefore he says, if I don't come back, then you are divorced, and that way you can go and marry anyone you want. Anyway, ata upsake mi mavra. Amar lehu, chazu da'atai. And so on the 30th day, exactly at the end of the day, right before sunset, he is on the other side of a river, but he wasn't able to go because the ferry was on the was not there. He missed the last ferry of the day. The ferry was on the wrong side, but he's at the dock on the other side of the river, and he's yelling and waving. Look, I came back. Does that count? Amar Shemuel, la shemeh matyav. Shemuel says, sorry. A for effort, but does not count. So even though it was impossible, it was against his will. He really wanted to be there, and he did everything he could. Nevertheless, we say, even though it's beyond your ability to come back, but you tried as much as you can. This is called ones. We're going to see it here in a second. This would be an ones begitin, something that is beyond your control. We do not consider to be, did not come into consideration legally, and therefore you did not fulfill this condition of coming back, and you are divorced. Okay, that is the law. Now, hahu damar lehu. A similar incident of a husband who gives a get to an agent, and he says, if I am not able to appease my wife within 30 days, then this get should be effective. And now, Azal paisa vela'i paisa. He went and he tried to appease her. He apologized. He says he loves her, all that, but she would not be appeased. She says, no, I still want my divorce. What's the law? Amar Rav Yosef, mi yahiv la tarkeba de dinare vela I paisa. Rav Yosef said it is a valid divorce. Did the husband do everything possible? Did he give her a big box full of money and she was still not appeased? He didn't do that, right? So he said he's sorry. Maybe he wrote a poem. He gave some flowers. Not good enough. So the condition doesn't depend on his effort. It depends on the result. He said, if she will not be appeased, and she is not appeased, and therefore this would be the same as what Shemuel said, something that is honest is not counted legally, even as much as he tried. That is one version of what Rav Yosef said, but then there's an opposite version. Ika de Amr, Amar Rav Yosef, midi tarkeba di dinare ba'ed metav la ha paisa velo I paisa. Rav Yosef said it as a question. See, the same words can mean one thing if you say it as a statement, a different thing if you say it as a question. He said, does he need to give her a box full of coins? What does the guy need to do to appease her, right? He did everything he can. He sent flowers, chocolates, he wrote a poem, he apologized, he was sincere about it, and still she wouldn't be appeased. So that's her problem. He made all his effort, and therefore that counts. Effort counts. And because he did what he had to do, he did enough, and therefore the get is invalid, right? Because the condition was not fulfilled. He did what he had to do to appease her, even though she wasn't appeased. Okay, so this is very opposite conclusion. So we say, keman de amar yesh ones begitin. The second version of Rav Yosef says that we do count ones. It does have legal standing and a get. If you tried, even though as much as you can to do something so that the get would not be fulfilled, then that counts as long as you did everything you could and it was beyond your control. It's beyond the husband's control whether she's going to feel in the mood to accept the apology or not. But he did everything he can, and therefore it's not a get. And whereas the first version, Hakiman Damad, and on this Gittin, first version says only if the literal meaning of the condition is fulfilled, or in this case, rather, not triggered, then it will not be a get. But if literally what he says doesn't happen, then the get goes through. If he's not actually back in the city, even though he's on the other side saying, "Here I am," or if he did apologize, but she didn't accept it, then she didn't accept it, right? And therefore, it is a get according to the second opinion that says "en on this Gittin." Okay, that concludes that topic of regarding get, and now next topic. Hamalve ma'ot et hakohen ve'et halevi ve'et ha'ani liot mafrish alehen mehalkan, mafrish alehen becheskat shehen kayamin, ve'en o choshesh shem amet hakohen o levi o ha'ashir ha'ani. So a person, a farmer, a landowner, lends money to either a kohen or a levi or a poor person. And that way, when he separates teruma, maaser rishon, or maaser ani, respectively, that he will deduct that from the loan. The idea is as follows. Let's say you have a poor person, and so maaser sheni, maaser ani rather, goes to a poor person, and instead of waiting, the poor person having to wait until the produce grows, and then we'll see how much there is there a lot, is there a little, but then maaser for the poor person to get it, they make a deal at the beginning of the season. It's kind of like selling futures. And so the farmer says, "Listen, I don't want to deal and go find a poor person when my produce is ready. Here, I'm going to give you $1,000 now," right? And that's an estimate of how much my maaser is going to be. So here's $1,000 up front. I'm giving it to you as a loan that you'll have to pay back. But in reality, the poor person will not have to pay it back, and there's no expectation that the poor person will have to pay it back. Instead, the farmer is going to eventually, when the produce grows, he will separate maaser ani and say, "Okay, how much is here? Whatever, $950. I'm deducting that from the loan," and so that way the poor person doesn't have to pay back the loan, and so he simply keeps that produce. Same thing with teruma. Teruma is going to be in total $100 for teruma. So he tells the kohen, "Here's $100. I'm lending it to you. When the produce comes ready, then I'll separate some teruma." Now, teruma, the farmer can't eat himself, but the monetary value is already paid for because that will be deducted from the loan amount. And then the farmer can take that teruma and he can sell it to a kohen or use it to pay a kohen worker, whatever. And the same thing with maaser rishon that goes to a levi. Maaser rishon is only a monetary obligation to give to the levi, but anyone can eat it, right? A levi has maaser rishon. The levi can invite over Israel to come and eat it with them, or can sell it back. And so same thing here. I'm going to give the levi from now. That way, the levi knows he has a set amount to live by for the year, and the owner says, "Now I don't have to deal with finding a levi. It's good for both parties." The levi also, or this ani or kohen, also knows he will be the beneficiary of it, right? Because otherwise, you never know who the farmer is going to decide to give it to later on. And so this is a very good deal for both. And so it could be in the end that the produce will be less than the amount. And if it's less than $1,000, the expectation is that the loan will not be paid back. The rest of it will just go away as a gift. So it's he may be overestimating, but the farmer's okay with that. He knows it's a set amount, and then whatever he produces, he will separate, deduct, and he doesn't have to give anyone any actual fruit, because he paid them all already. Okay, and why we're bringing all this? because the point is we assume that that person is still alive, right? Way in the beginning of the season, he gave this loan to the Kohen, to the Levi, or to the poor person. Now, if that Kohen or Levi or poor person died, then they no longer can be a recipient of the Terumah or Maaser Rishon or Maaser Ani. And if they're not a recipient, then the farmer has to give it to someone else. But the Mishnah teaches you can assume if the last time you saw them they were alive, you can assume they are alive now, and you can separate it out even without seeing them and saying, oh, this will be the terumah, and I'll deduct it from the amount, and then you can take the terumah as your own. You can own it. A kohen has to eat it, but you're allowed to own it. Now, metu, what if in fact they did die, right? You got a message, oh, this kohen that you had made this deal with has died, or the Levi. Then sarich litol reshut min hayorshim. Then you have to go to the heirs and say, listen, I made this deal with your father, that I lent him money, and so you would have to pay back. We're going to see in the Gemara, do the heirs have to pay back? It depends if they inherited land or not. If they inherited land, then the inheritors will have to pay the loan. So the farmer can go to them and say, listen, well, you have this loan out, so either pay back or we can make the same deal, right? If they're sons of Kohanim, then they're probably Kohanim too. They are Kohanim too, and the heirs most of the time will be also a Kohen or also a Levi if their father was a Levi, unless there's daughters or other cases. And so he says, listen, you want to make the same deal? Any produce that I have, I will take terumah and I'll deduct that from your loan. So if the heirs are okay with that, then you can continue. But you have to get their permission. Im hilvan b'fnei betin eno sarich litol reshut min hayorshin. If, however, he made this loan in front of a bet din, then he does not have to get permission from the inheritors. In other words, if it was done in front of bet din, if it's done just with an individual, then the deal is only with that individual. The individual dies, and now the deal will not continue. After all, if it's not with land, if they don't inherit land, then they don't even have to pay it back. So then you can't just assume that this deal will go through, as the Gemara will explain. But if you did it in front of Bet Din acts kind of like a corporation. You make a deal with a corporation, even if the owner of that corporation dies, someone will take it over that has a corporate entity. And Bet Din has that effect, that the Bet Din can make a deal basically on behalf of all Kohanim, or all Leviim, or even all poor people, and say, listen, even if this particular Levi dies, you can deduct your loan from all Leviim, and you don't have to give the produce to any other Levi. And so he will not have to get permission from the heirs. That's the Mishnah. Now, now we ask, hold on, even this, you can do this deal even though, let's say, the terumah did not actually get to the hands of the kohen. I mean, besides the monetary value, isn't there also a mitzvah to actually separate the terumah and give it to a kohen? Separate the Maaser Rishon and give it to a Levi, right? Where is the act of giving? So we're going to see three answers. Rav says we're talking about a case where a person, this farmer, always gives it to the same Levi. Every time, or Kohen, it says Kehuna, or Levi. He always gives the same. Since he always gives it to the same person, it's always, they have a relationship, they're friends. So it's already expected, so it's like he already gave it. Right, kind of like, if you go to a certain store and pick up the newspaper every single day, the guy knows, the regular. So you know what, it's like it's already his. Even without doing an act of transfer. That's one answer. Shmuel Amar b'mezakeh lahem al yedei acherim. Shmuel says, no, you can transfer it to this Kohen or Levi with a third party. The farmer just gets anybody off the street and says, listen, come do me a favor. Take these olives here on behalf of that Kohen. And you can do that because Zachin L'Adam Shelo Befanav. So that third party, he doesn't acquire it for himself, he acquires it for the Kohen. Then he gives it back to the farmer, and the farmer now says, okay, I did my act of giving, but now I will deduct it from the loan, and now I will keep the produce. Oh, that's the second answer. Third, Ula Amar Hamaneh Rabbi Yosehi. Damar asu et she'eno zoche kezoche. Rabbi Yosef says, he's even a minority opinion, but he says in various cases, the sages can make an ordinance and say even someone who didn't actually acquire it, it's like they acquire it. And so here we will implement that we will make it as if they actually did an act of acquisition, and so he gave it. All right, now we're going to wonder how come each of these Moraim doesn't agree with the others. Rabbi Yosef says a Tana, but we're just applying his opinion here. Each of these answers, why wouldn't the ones who propose these answers agree with the other one? So the rest of them won't agree with Rav because the Mishnah doesn't say that it's the associate that he always gives it to. So how can you assume that? Shmuel, you can't say what Shmuel said because in the Mishnah it doesn't say that he gives it to a third party. That would be an important detail, and it's not in the Mishnah, so how can you assume it? And like Ula said, the third one, quoting Rabbi Yosef, but Rabbi Yosef is a minority opinion, and so we're not going to assume that the Mishnah is like a minority opinion, and that's why not everybody agrees with Ola. And so therefore there's a pro for each one. Each one's able to answer, but there's also a con in each answer because each one has its own difficulty, and that's why not everybody can agree on the same answer. Next, Tenu Rabbanan. Hamalveh ma'ot et hakohen ve'et halevi ve'et ha'ani liot mafrish alehen mechelkan mafrish alehen bechezkat shehen kayamin. Someone who lends money to a Kohen, to a Levi, or to a poor person, and then, this is just repeating the Mishnah, will deduct from what they eventually separate from the amount of the loan, you can assume that the person is still alive. Okay, that's just a repeat, but now the Braita is going to continue and add about 5 more stipulations and details about it. Uposek imahen keshad hazol ve'en bo mishum ribit ve'en shibi'it misham teto. So the farmer can make an agreement at the beginning, at that time. He says when the price of the produce, the apples, right, the price goes up, the price goes down, depending on when. So what would be the set price? So the farmer can say it will be the cheapest price, whether the cheapest price is now when I'm making the loan, or if it gets cheaper later when I actually separate the produce. I want the cheapest amount. That's how I'm going to assess the value of it. So this will benefit the lender, the landowner. So this is why it makes sense. So because when you're selling futures, listen, I'm guaranteeing you a price now, and you get the money right now up front. But in return, the lender will get the lowest price. The lowest price is good for him because that means that if the apple is worth $1 now, but in the future only 50 cents, then in the future when he separates it, it will only deduct from the loan 50 cents. And so it will require twice as many apples before the loan is paid off, which is good for the landowner, is a negative for the Kohen. Now, even though that means that the Kohen technically is losing out and will have to pay more back, right? He's going to have to give up more apples than he would have had we followed the price then, or the higher price. So it looks like actually it could be ribit, right? Because if I'm lending you $1,000, and now at the point that it's time to at the point that I'm separating it, I am deducting actually at the current price $2,000 worth of apples, right? So in effect, the Kohen is paying more than he received. But in this case, we don't say that's ribit, because this loan, after all, the Kohen is never going to actually pay back, right? It's a bit of a legal fiction. We're calling it a loan, but really it's like I'm paying you now for the future teruma maaser that's going to happen. And if the farmer disappears, goes out of business, doesn't have any produce that year, then he's never going to get paid back anyway. And so it's not like the farmer is going to get more money. It's not really to beat, because he's not getting any more money. It's just that he will be able to deduct more produce from the land, and so that's why it's not considered a beat. And it's also it can go right through Shivi'it. Shivi'it at the end of the 7th year will not cancel the loan, because after all, the loan really is not going to be paid anyway, right? He's never going to come and say, hey, give me the money. He's only deducting, using it to deduct, so he doesn't have to give maaser. If the lender wants to change his mind, he's not allowed to change his mind. If he says, "Listen, you know what? I want to give you the produce instead," right? Maybe the price went up, and so I'd rather give you the produce, and I don't want to deduct the loan and give me the money for the loan. He can't do that, right? That's it. Once he made this deal, the lender cannot go back on it. Nitja'ashu ha'be'alim en mafrish alehen lefi she'en mafrishin al ha'abud. If the landowner had yeush regarding the loan, he despaired of ever retrieving the loan. He said, let's say there's no crop that year. He says, listen, I'm not even going to have anything growing, and they're not going to pay back. He's not going to pay back. Won't be able to deduct anything. And he already wrote off the loss. But then all of a sudden something did grow. Then you cannot deduct from it anymore, because you can't separate teruma or maaser on the basis of a loan that you already wrote off, because then he doesn't owe it anymore. That Kohen or Levi doesn't owe it, because I already had Yush, and so he has to keep in mind. So it's not, he has to keep in mind that, yes, I'm expecting to get paid back. He is going to pay me back, but in reality, he knows the guy probably already spent the money. He's a poor person. He's not going to have capital to pay it, but I'm still expecting him to pay it. But I know that I'm going to have produce, and I'll deduct that, right? So I was expecting it to be paid in that way. But if he thinks he's not going to have produce, it didn't rain, and he already gave up on any possibility of collecting or deducting from it, then he can no longer go back and use it for deduction. All right, that's the end of the Braita, and now we're going to analyze each part. Amar Mor, Posek Mahen Kashad Hazol, Peshita. The farmer owner can say, I want to assess the produce according to the lowest market rate, whatever it will be. So isn't that obvious? He can do that. Hakamash Malan, Afapisha Lo Pasak, Kemisha Pasak Adame, is teaching us that even if you didn't say it explicitly, it's as if you said it. That's the whole point of making this, right? The benefit to the Kohen or Levi is that they get their money up front, and they're guaranteed. I'm not going to pick a different Kohen or Levi or poor person. That's their benefit. The benefit to the farmer is that he can get a good price now for it, because he can assume, listen, you'll agree, right, to the lowest price, even if he doesn't say it. That's how the transaction always goes, and so that is implied. How come this is not liable to interest? Even if the price goes down and now he can deduct twice as much of his produce than the higher market value would allow for. Because since if the farmer has no produce, he's not going to collect anything. When he does have produce, we also don't say it's ribit. The farmer is not actually getting any more money. It would be ribit if I give you $1,000 and you give me back $1,001. That is interest. But now he's not getting back anything at all. So the amount of deduction, that's not, the increase in the amount of deduction is not called ribit. That's all fits in with the total deal. Ve'en shebi'it meshamteto de la karena be lo yigos, and it can go right through shebi'it. Shebi'it will not cancel the loan, because we don't call this collecting the loan. That's if I go to you and I say, hey, give me that $1,000 after the Shivi'it. That's not allowed. But there's no expectation here of you ever paying back the loan, so therefore we can go through Shivi'it and I can still deduct. the produce from the amount of the loan. V'im bala hazor eno hozer. It says if he wants to change his mind, he cannot change his mind. Which way? Who's changing their mind? Amara papa lo shanu ela bal habayit bekohen. So this only applies to the landowner. He cannot change his mind and go to the Kohen and says, you know what, I changed my mind, I want you to actually pay back, give me that $1,000. He cannot do that. Aval Kohen ve'bal habayit im bal hachazor chozer ditnan natan lo ma'ot ve'lo mashach hemenu perot yachol lachzor bo. The Kohen can come and say, listen, you lent me $1,000, I want to pay back, I want to pay you back, and I don't want you to deduct the produce. He can decide that. The Kohen might not even get the produce after that. After that, might not be his friend. And maybe I'll give it to a different Kohen. But nevertheless, the Kohen can go back on the deal if he wants. And we know that because Mishnah Baba Metzia says, even if the purchaser gave money but did not take the produce, the seller can renege on the deal. This is in general any sale. If I'm at the supermarket and I put my stuff down there, or better, a store where there's something behind the counter. I didn't touch it yet, right? I just want to give me that pack of batteries, and I pay for it. And the store owner took the money, but I didn't yet touch the batteries. I didn't take the batteries yet. The sale is not final because transferring money doesn't effectuate the sale. Only when I pick up the batteries that effectuates the sale. And so therefore I can change my mind. Here also we apply the same thing. Even though I gave money to the Kohen, I gave it as a loan, but even if I gave it as a sale, the Kohen did not actually acquire the produce because, well, at that time it doesn't exist. And the Kohen actually is never going to come over and is never going to take it. And since he didn't take it yet, he can say, before I separated it, before I give it to a third party or do something else to effectuate the transaction, since it's not effectuated yet, the Kohen can say, listen, no, I don't want the futures of your future produce that you're going to separate. Here's back the money. And because there's no legal way that we can force him to take something, to own something that he didn't pull. Okay, nitiyashu ba'alim en mafrish alehen lefi she'en mafrishin al ha'abud. If the owner said, oh, okay, I'm not going to have produce, and therefore, I'm never going to collect my money. Once he says that, now he can't use it to deduct anyway either. Pishita, isn't this obvious? La siricha de'akun, mahu detema akanta miletahi kamashmalan. We need this for a case not only where it didn't rain and there's no produce at all. In that case, for sure, I said, oh, I'm not going to get my money back ever. I'm writing off the loan. Right? That would be pishita. But this phrase of the Braita comes to teach us that even where there were stalks that grew, something grew, but they were kind of dried out, and you might have thought that, well, since there is growth of stalks, so that's something significant, and therefore I didn't fully despair, right? I was like, it doesn't look like anything of value is going to grow here, but there's still a chance. But once I already had that thought that nothing's going to grow, even though there's something there. So I might have thought that in that case, it's not fully give yeush. So kamash malan, the Braita comes to teach that that's also called yeush, right? If stalks grew, but they're all dried out, then most farmers say, oh, nothing of value is going to grow, even in that case, and they write off the loan. And once that happens, then even if something does somehow grow miraculously, I cannot use that loan anymore and deduct from it. I have to go and take to the maaser and give it to the Kohen Levi and to the Ani. Tanya. Now another Braita. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Hamaveh ma'ot et HaKohen vet HaLevi bebet din umetu mafrish alehen becheskat oto hashevet. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov teaches that someone, a farmer who lends money to a Kohen or a Levi in a bet din, and then that Kohen or Levi Levi die, the farm owner can continue to separate terumah and maaser, and even though that person is not alive, he can do it by assuming the entire tribe, right? So the entire tribe kind of takes on the loan, and therefore the farmer says, I'm taking this off, and the tribe is forgiving the loan, so I don't have to give the terumah to a different kohen. Like a different kohen can't come and say, well, that kohen died, so therefore you still owe a terumah, so give me the terumah, or give it to some kohen. No, the whole tribe is in agreement because you did it in Beit Din, and so Beit Din has the power to represent all Kohanim or all Leviim, and so we can continue to deduct from the loan even though the original Kohen or Levi has died. And similarly, if he'd made a deal for Maaser Ani with a certain poor person, and he did it in Beit Din, and then that Ani died, he can continue to deduct from that loan and assume that all the poor people are kind of like themselves, a group, a tribe, and have collectively agreed that the loan will continue, and I, the farmer, can deduct from that loan still. Okay, so that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says, Aniye Yisrael. Rabbi Yachai agrees, but just a slightly different formulation. Omer, Bechazkat Aniye Olam. Even all poor people in the world. In other words, even if there were somehow no poor people in Israel, it could still be that guy that died was the last poor person, Jewish poor person ever. Still, I could continue deducting for the other poor people in the world. Now, my benai, who will be a practical difference between these two opinions? If there were Samaritan poor, so do they count? According to the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, they do not count. And if there's no Jewish poor people, maybe not in the whole world, maybe in that area for me to actually give it to, right? It has to be practical. I have to be able to give the poor person this produce, and there's no Jewish poor people in the area, then I can no longer deduct. Whereas, according to Rav Achai, if there's some Samaritan poor people in the area, then they also count. Okay. He'eshir he'ani en mafrish alav vezacha hala bema shebiyado. There's a baraita here that teaches, let's say that poor person, I made a deal with the poor person, and when he was poor, but then in the meantime, before my produce became ready, he became rich. He won the lottery. So now I can't give him the Maaser Ani. He's not poor enough for it. Then I cannot deduct the loan from it. And not only that, but that formerly poor person keeps the money that he had. Why does he keep the money? Because this kind of loan no one expects is ever going to be paid back. And so basically the landowner forgives the loan. That guy, that poor person, even though he won the lottery, doesn't even have to return the $1,000. And I, the farmer, have to go and separate Maaser Ani and give it to a different poor person. Okay, so that's the Braita. V'Rabbanan, Mai shena lemita de'avud takanta, Mai shena la'ashirut de la'avud takanta. So now we ask the rabbis in general, what's the difference between when the Kohen or Levi or the poor person dies, that if I do it in Beit Din, the rabbis made a takana and said, you know what, we'll assume that you can continue deducting from the loan because we'll make it that the whole tribe or all aniyim will be part of this deal, and they will kind of assume the loan and you can continue deducting it. How come they made, this is a takana, a special law that the Beit Din is allowing the person to do? How come they only made that when the poor person dies? But if the poor person becomes rich, they didn't make such a takana. They said, oh, it became rich? Well, then that's it. Sorry, right? You don't have to, you can't deduct. The loan is forgiven, and you have to go find another poor person. How come they didn't make the same takana and say, all right, this guy's not poor, but there's other poor people, and so the poor people in general will assume the loan from now on? Why didn't they make the same takana? We see, by the way, that this is a takana. The rabbis are going out of their way to help this type of deal go through, because it's beneficial for the poor people it encourages the landowners to go and be proactive and give to the poor and give them early on and give them a lump sum, and that's the way it's guaranteed. They know what's good. They know how much they're going to get, even if possibly in the end it might be less than they would have gotten otherwise, but overall it's for their benefit to have more or less fixed income at the beginning of the year. So the rabbis were interested in making sure this happens, and that's why they said, listen, and don't worry if the guy dies, come do it in Bet Din. Even if that guy dies, you won't lose your money, farmer, you can still keep deducting. So how come the rabbis made that special takana when the poor person dies, but not when he gets rich? And the answer is mita shechicha, ashirut la shechicha, because death is common, and everybody dies, and every poor person is going to die, and so the farmer owner will be worried and say, I don't want to give it to this guy, he might die, and then I'm going to lose all my money. And so there, the rabbis had to make a takana. But a poor person becoming rich, that happens less often, right? Every poor person dies, not every poor person gets rich. And so therefore, we didn't have to worry about that more unusual case. The farmer will say, what are the chances he's going to get rich? Oh, that's okay, I'll take my chances in that regard. A fun play on words. Papa says, this is the folk saying, is if you hear a rumor that your friend has died, then believe it. Asher, right? It's true. If you hear a rumor that your poor friend became wealthy, don't believe it, right? It's probably just a rumor. Okay, but it's a nice play on words. It ashad with an ayin and asher with an aleph. Next clause of the Mishnah, met sarich litol reshut, if the Kohen or Levi died, and this is not in Bet Din, this is the second to last clause, no Bet Din, then the loan goes to the children, and the farmer has to go and confirm the deal that if he wants to continue doing it with the children, and say to the children, listen, you don't have to pay back, but I want to be able to deduct the produce that I would give to you, as to the mal maaser. Tanya, Rabbi Omer, Yorshin sheyarshu. Rabbi in this Braita explains the Mishnah, says we're talking about heirs who inherit. Umika Yorshin delayate, and then we wonder, what was Rabbi saying about this? Are there heirs who don't inherit? If they're Yorshin, doesn't that by definition mean that they're inheriting? Ella Amar Rabbi Yochanan sheyarshu karka velo sheyarshu kesafim. Rabbi Yochanan explains Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's words. It means that they inherited land, and not that they inherited only money. The reason is, as we mentioned, if the heirs inherit land, then they also inherit the obligation to pay back the loan. So the loan continues, and that's why the farmer can come and say, hey, you have an outstanding loan, you have land, so you have to pay back the loan. If you want, don't pay back the loan and allow me to deduct the amount, the Tiruman Maaser. So that's when he would renegotiate and make sure the deal continues. But if the inheritors inherited only money, then they have no obligation to pay back the loan at all. The rabbis say it's a mitzvah, it's nice to clear your father's debts and have a good name, but they have no legal obligation. Because they have no legal obligation to pay back the loan, so then that's it. The farm owner lost out, and he has to go and separate to the ma'an maaser. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hiniach melo machat gobe melo machat, melo kordom gobe melo kordom. Rabbi Yonatan says, if the father died and left a tiny piece of land, only enough that you could put a needle there. That's how big the land is. Well, in that case, all that the loan is continues. It's true, but the amount that they have to pay would be only the value of that land, right? How much is a piece of land worth that much? Well, maybe in Manhattan it's worth a lot. A square millimeter. Okay, whatever it is it worth $5? So then the lender can only collect $5. That's it, because it's the value of the land. And if the land was a little bigger, the size of an X, so this big, not that much bigger, then again he can only collect that much. Maybe that would be $50. So according to the Bionatan, that's all he would be able to collect, and so that wouldn't be that much. Depends on the size of the land. If I made a deal for $100,000 of produce and they only have land worth 50,000, then I would only be able to deduct that much. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it doesn't work that way. If you have any land at all that you inherited, then I can collect the full amount of it. The example he uses, even if it's only a needle's worth size of a needle, the land, I can collect even an axe full of land, even though it's not so big. But he's just using the same terminology as Rabbi Yonatan. But Rabbi Yochanan really means that you can collect even $1 million, even if there's a tiny piece of land. And well, how could you ever do that? Well, you could, because it would be like the story of the small amount of land in the court that came of Abaye. This is a story that we learned in Masechet Ketubot, where these inheritors had. They inherited a small piece of land. Let's say there was a $100,000 loan, and this land was only worth $50,000. And so the lender came and said, "Okay, I'm collecting your land. I'm seizing your land in partial payment of the loan." So they take the land, $50,000. Good. Now the heirs say, "Listen, this is our ancestral land. We really want it." So they buy it back. Or they pay, they have cash, so they buy it back from the lender. Okay, now they own the land. The lender comes a second time and says, I'm seizing it again because this is to pay back the rest of the loan. So he can re-seize the same land as many times as he needs to in order to fulfill the loan. And therefore, even if it's a tiny piece of land, one size of one needle, he can seize it again and again until the entire loan is paid. And therefore, the entire loan is considered outstanding, even if there's a tiny piece of land. Tenor Rabbanan, Yisrael shamar leLevi, maaser yesh lecha biyadi, en chosheshin litrumat maaser shebo. Kol maaser yesh lecha biyadi, chosheshin litrumat maaser shebo. This baraita is about a new case. That's a variation of the case of the Mishnah. A farmer who's a Yisrael comes to a Levi and tells him, I have maaser in my hands that belongs to you. In other words, his produce was ready. He separated maaser rishon for a specific Levi in mind. And he comes to the Levi and he says, listen, I separated it with you in mind, so it's yours, but it's still on my farm. And he offers him money. He says, here, take the value instead, and I'll keep the produce. In that case, en chosheshin, we don't have to worry about the terumat maaser that's in it. This baraita is enigmatic. We're going to see three interpretations of it. But the basic thing is that because this is an unspecified amount, he didn't tell him how much maaser. He says, I have an unspecified amount of maaser that's in my farm. That's for you. We don't have to worry about terumat maaser. That's the 10th of the 10th. That the Levi is responsible to give to a Kohen. So we'll see what those words mean. But anyway, we don't worry about whatever that is. However, if I come to I'm the Yisrael farmer, I come to the Levi and I say, I have a kod, right, a measurement of maaser in my land that belongs to you. I separated it and I had you in mind, and here I'm going to pay you for it instead. In that case, since I specified the amount, I do have to worry about terumat maaser, that we'll see who, but we're going to start off assuming that the Levi might have taken, or even mentally, might have taken terumat maaser from the maaser on my farm, and now I wouldn't be able to just, even if I pay him for it, I wouldn't be able to eat that maaser because there may be terumat maaser in it. Okay, my kamar. What does this baraita mean? Interpretation number one. Amar Rabbi Hachi kamar. Yisrael shamar Levi. Maaser yesh lecha biyadi vehelach tamav. En chosheshin shema asaot tirumat maaser al makom acher. I come to the Levi and I say, I separated tiruma on unspecified amount in my farm for you, and I offer him the money. We don't worry that Levi in the meantime, before he accepts the money, decides, oh, you know what? I have a whole bunch of produce on my own that I need to take Terumat Maaser. A lot of other people gave him Maaser. He has to take Terumat Maaser on it. He said, I know, I'll designate, all this he does in his mind, I'll designate from my field, the Levi will designate from the Yisrael's field, all of that Terumat Maaser will be, all of that Maaser will be Terumah, and that will cover the rest of the produce that I own, and so that I gave all my Terumat Maaser that I have elsewhere. I don't have to worry about that. The reason I don't have to worry about it is because I didn't tell him how much it is. So he won't be able to make a calculation, and so therefore I can assume that he did not do that. He did not take Terumat Maaser at that point. And then once I pay him the money, once I give him the money, then that's it. Then he doesn't belong to him anymore. So he wouldn't be able to designate Terumat Maaser from there. That's case one. However, Kol Maaser yesh lecha biyadi vehelach damav chosheshin shema asaot Terumat Maaser al makom acher. If I tell him how much it is, it's a kor, and I have it on my farm, and it belongs to you, and here, I'm going to offer you money for it. Here's what we worry. The Levi can kind of double-cross the Israel, and the Levi can say, oh, there's a cord there? A cord happens to be, I have 10 cord of produce that other farmers gave me, and I didn't take terumah from it. So you know what? I have to give 10% of those others. I will designate all of this Israel's produce that he still has on his farm. That will be my Terumat Maaser to cover everything else. And then he takes the money too. Now I'm the farmer. I paid for it. So now it should belong to me. Yeah, it belongs to me. However, I go home and actually it's all Terumah. So I can't even eat any of it. So that is a problem, and I have to worry that he did that, and I won't be able to go ahead and eat it. I'm going to have to go and find some kohen to be able to eat all the things at home. So if it's unspecified amount, I don't worry about that. If it is a specified amount, then I have to worry about that. That's Abaye's interpretation. But the Gemara rejects it. What do you think? We're dealing with evil people? This Levi is going to double cross the Israel, and he's going to basically stealing because he's taking money, and he also made that maaser to Terumat Maaser, so that I can't even use it. So when he could, I mean, technically it would work if he did that, but we don't assume that the Baraita is addressing the law to evil people that would double cross and trick the Israel. Ela amar Rav Meshashia bered Rav Idi hachika amar. So second interpretation, Yisrael shamar leben Levi. Maaser le'avicha biyadi, helach damav. I am the Israel farmer. I go to the son of a Levi and say, listen, I separated this maaser on behalf of your father, and then your father died. So now you inherit it. So so it's on my farm, but it belongs to you. Here is the money. So this solves the problem that we had before, because I separated while the father was alive, and now we don't know. We can't even ask him, did you designate that as Terumat Maaser or not? And he would be able to, because he did. This was before, when he was alive. If he wanted to take Terumat Maaser, he could have done that. So here the law is, En chosheshin shema asa aviv Terumat Maaser al makom acher. We don't worry that the father designated my produce, the produce on my land, as Terumat Maaser for other produce that he had, because it's unspecified. So he wouldn't be able to make any calculation that would be 10% of some other amount. However, Kol Maaser lavicha biyadi vehelach damav. If I tell the son, listen, when your father was around, I told him that I'm separating on behalf of him a cord of teruma of maaser, and in that case, chosheshin shema asa aviv terumat maaser al makom acher. I do have to suspect that the father may have said, oh, there's a court over there of maaser that belongs to me. You know what? I'll designate as terumah to cover the rest of the produce that I have. And now I give it to now I'm giving money to the son. Here is money. Now the son doesn't know whether the father did or not. So there's no ethical breach that the son is double crossing me. So in the first case, if it's unspecified amount, I can go home and take that maaser because I paid for it. So now it's mine. Maaser rishon, as we said before, has no prohibition. So it's only a monetary obligation, but it can be eaten by anybody. And so I can go home and eat it. But if I said a cord, that I told the father that there was a cord there, then I have to suspect that the father might have taken that, used that as terumah. In that case, I can only give or sell that produce to a kohen. All right, so that's the second interpretation. But then we reject that too. We're assuming that the father is a chaver. Chaver is someone who's very meticulous in the laws of Terumah Maaser. And someone like that is you're not supposed to separate from one pile to another pile that's not nearby. The reason for that is because, let's say I have this pile here, and I say, oh, the pile that is somewhere else will be terumah for this. You shouldn't do that, because who knows if that pile over there is still there. Maybe it blew away, maybe it was stolen. You should only do it if it's right in front of you. And therefore, a properly acting chaver, Levi, would not say, oh, the produce that's on this Yisrael's land, that I'm not even there, will be terumat maaser for other produce. So we don't assume that someone would have done that. Ela amad Rav Asher, rather a third interpretation, and this third interpretation is going to have to actually reword the Braita, actually switch the N to the first case as follows: Hachi kamar ben Israel she'amar leLevi. So it's not the father. The one who has the father is the Israel. So this is Israel whose father died, and now he inherits the farm and the produce, and he goes to a Levi and says, Kach amar li Abba, Maaser lecha biyadi, or Maaser lavicha biyadi. So I go to a Levi and I say, my father told me that he separated some produce, and it's on my farm, and it belongs to you, or it belongs to your father. And so now, chosheshim litrumat maaser shebo kevan de lachitz lahava metaken le baal habayit. In that case, the Yisrael, have to worry that in that maaser that my father designated, there is still trumat maaser in it that hasn't been separated. Why? Because there's no designation of how much it was. And so my father didn't calculate how much it was. So he would not have separated out the terumat maaser. Terumat maaser, the typical way it works is that Yisrael would give maaser to the Levi. The Levi would take a tenth of that and give it to a kohen. But in practice, it was often easier, as the Gemara will say in a minute, for the farmer himself to separate the maaser, and himself to take a terumat maaser, and then give that terumat maaser to a kohen, and the rest, the 9%, to a Levi. And so let's assume that he's doing it that way. Because it was an unspecified amount, I cannot assume that my father already separated the Trumat Maaser. So now I go to Levi and say, listen, my father separated some maaser that belongs to you. Here's the money for it. When I go home, I still have to take terumat maaser, a tenth of that, and give it to the kohen, right? Because it was unspecified. However, kol maaser lecha biyadi, or kol maaser leavicha biyadi, and chosheshin terumat maaser shebo kevan dechitz takeneh baal habayit. If I go to the Levi, I'm the farmer Yisrael, and I say a specified amount, there's a koda maaser that belongs to you, it's on my farm, or a koda maaser of your father, right? I made this deal with your father, and it's on my farm, and this is my father told me, right? My father had separated maaser and given it either to you or to your father. So now I pay for it, and I go home, en choshishin. I don't have to worry about there being terumat maaser in it. Why? Because it's a fixed amount of kor. Certainly, the father would have said, while he was separating the maaser, he would have said, how much is it? A kor? Okay, I know how much it is, so no, I'm going to take a tenth of that and designate it as separated as terumat maaser, and he already separated it, gave it to the kohen, and now I can eat the rest of whatever is there. And so you see, in order for this to work, you have to switch. The first one is the first case of unspecified, is where choshishin. The second case is where en choshishin. That is Rav Asher's interpretation, and we don't have any questions about that. But now, except this one question. But this is a more general question. Can an owner take Terumat Maaser as a Yisrael? Don't I have to give it to the Levi? So the Levi can give it to a Kohen? It makes a difference, because if I separate it, I can do any Kohen I want. The Levi, he says, no, I want all 10%, so that he can pick his friend who's a Kohen to give it to. So am I allowed to even do that? And the answer is yes. In Abba Elazar ben Gamla, this baraita is the opinion of Abba Elazar ben Gamla, the Tanya. Abba Elazar ben Gamla omer, v'nechshav lachem terumatchem, says regarding the Maaser Sheni, that it will be like your tirumot, in plural. Why does it say it in plural? Right, that pasuk is talking about terumat maaser that the Levi gives to a kohen, and yet it says it in plural. Why? Achat terumat gedolah v'achat terumat ketana, because it's comparing terumat gedolah. That's the 2% or so that the Yisrael gives directly to the kohen, and it's comparing that to the terumat maaser that the Levi gives to the kohen from his maaser that he receives, and comparing it for many laws. Number one, keshem she'terumat gedolah nitel be'omed machshava, kach terumat maaser nitel be'omed machshava. Just like terumat gedolah, it's not an exact amount. I can give about, I'll give about 2%. I don't have to measure it exactly. So too, terumat maaser can also be done by estimation. All right, even though that actually is a fixed amount, but he can estimate what it is. Also, one can do it in one's mind. Because I don't have to physically separate it. I can say the 2% that's on the left side is going to be teruma. The Levi can also do that for terumat maaser. And the next comparison, sheyesh lo reshut lebal habayit litrom teruma gedolah, kach yesh lo reshut lebal habayit litrom terumat maaser. Just like the owner, the farmer, the Yisrael, can take teruma gedolah and give it to the kohen, so too he can take terumat maaser. First, the farmer separates maaser. This is 10%, and then the farmer himself can take 10% of that and give it to the kohen and preempt the Levi. So yes, it can be done as long as you assume we're following about Elazar ben Gamla. So Rav Asher assumes that this baraita is following that opinion. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.